What was the Black Death? How did it change medieval society? The Black Death, a pandemic that swept through Europe in the mid-14th century, stands as one of the most catastrophic events in human history. Its impact on medieval Europe was profound, causing an estimated death toll of 25 to 30 million people, roughly one-third of the continent's population. The sheer scale of the mortality brought about by the Black Death led to significant social, economic, and cultural transformations, altering the trajectory of European society in ways that would resonate for centuries. Let's explore the various dimensions of the Black Death's impact on medieval Europe, analyzing how it reshaped social structures, disrupted economies, and influenced cultural and religious life. The arrival and spread of the Black Death. The Black Death, also known as the bubonic plague, originated in Central Asia and made its way to Europe via trade routes, most notably the Silk Road. It arrived in Europe in 1347, likely brought by fleas carried on rats that infested merchant ships. The disease spread rapidly through major ports, reaching cities such as Genoa, Venice, and Marseille, before moving inland across Europe. The pandemic persisted in waves until the early 1350s, leaving devastation in its wake. The plague manifested in three forms: bubonic, pneumonic, and septicemic. The most common, bubonic plague, was characterized by the sudden onset of fever, chills, and swollen lymph nodes or buboes. Pneumonic plague affected the lungs and could be transmitted through respiratory droplets, making it more contagious, while septicemic plague, the rarest form, infected the bloodstream and was almost always fatal. The symptoms and the speed at which the disease spread created an atmosphere of panic and despair, further exacerbating the societal impacts of the plague. Social impact: the collapse of the feudal system, disruption of the population structure. The Black Death drastically reduced the population of Europe, leading to a significant shift in the social structure. Before the plague, Europe was characterized by a feudal system in which the majority of the population were peasants or serfs, working the land under the authority of nobles and the church. The sudden and massive reduction in population disrupted this system. Entire villages were depopulated, and vast tracts of farmland were left untended as the labor force dwindled. The scarcity of labor gave surviving peasants and serfs newfound leverage. With fewer people available to work the land, labor became a valuable commodity. This led to demands for higher wages and better working conditions, which many landowners were forced to concede. The traditional feudal obligations that bound peasants to their lords began to break down as serfs sought to improve their lot, often moving to other areas in search of better opportunities. This mobility of the lower classes was previously unheard of and marked the beginning of the end for the rigidly hierarchical feudal system. Rise of the middle class. As the power of the nobility weakened, the middle class began to rise. Artisans, merchants, and skilled laborers found themselves in a stronger position as the demand for their goods and services increased. The economic shift allowed these groups to accumulate wealth and influence, which translated into greater social mobility. The rise of the middle class contributed to the gradual erosion of the strict class divisions that had characterized medieval society. Urban centers, in particular, saw significant changes. Cities that had once been under the tight control of feudal lords or the church began to assert greater autonomy. Guilds, which represented the interests of skilled workers, gained power, and urban governance began to reflect the interests of a broader spectrum of society. The empowerment of the middle class would have long-lasting effects on European society, paving the way for the economic and political developments that would eventually lead to the Renaissance. Changes in the role of women. The Black Death also had a profound impact on the role of women in medieval society. The high mortality rate meant that many women were left without male relatives to support them. In some cases, this led to women taking on roles that had traditionally been reserved for men, such as managing estates or running businesses. While medieval society was still heavily patriarchal, the necessity of survival led to a temporary relaxation of gender norms. In the immediate aftermath of the plague, women who inherited property from deceased male relatives found themselves in positions of relative power. Some women became heads of households, managing land and resources. Although this shift did not lead to permanent changes in gender roles, it did challenge existing norms and provided women with opportunities that had previously been inaccessible. Economic impact: shifts in labor, trade, and agriculture. Labor shortages and wage increases. The most immediate economic impact of the Black Death was the acute labor shortage it caused. With a significant portion of the population dead, the survivors found themselves in a position to demand higher wages. This shift in the labor market led to a dramatic increase in wages for both agricultural and urban workers. Landowners, desperate to maintain productivity, were often forced to comply with these demands, further eroding the traditional feudal relationships between lords and serfs. The Statute of Laborers, enacted in England in 1351, was an attempt by the ruling classes to control wages and prevent the rise of the working class. The statute aimed to freeze wages at pre-plague levels and restrict the movement of workers, but it was largely ineffective. The economic realities of the labor shortage meant that workers continued to command higher wages, and many ignored the restrictions, moving to areas where better opportunities were available. Agricultural decline and innovation. The Black Death also had a significant impact on agriculture. The drastic reduction in the population meant that large areas of farmland were left uncultivated. Some landowners converted their fields from labor-intensive crops like grain to pasture for sheep, which required less labor. This shift contributed to the growth of the wool industry, particularly in England, where wool became a major export commodity. The reduction in the labor force also spurred agricultural innovation. With fewer workers available, landowners sought ways to increase productivity through more efficient farming techniques. The period following the Black Death saw the adoption of new tools and methods, such as the heavy plow and crop rotation systems, which helped to offset the decline in agricultural output. These innovations would contribute to the gradual recovery of the European economy in the centuries that followed. Decline in trade and urbanization. The Black Death had a mixed impact on trade and urbanization. In the short term, the pandemic led to a decline in trade as populations dwindled and demand for goods fell. Many trade routes were disrupted, and cities that had been thriving centers of commerce were hit hard by the loss of life and the resulting economic downturn. However, in the long term, some cities were able to recover and even thrive. As the labor market adjusted and wages rose, a new class of wealthy merchants emerged. These merchants played a crucial role in revitalizing trade and urban centers. The decline in population also meant that there was less competition for resources, leading to the consolidation of wealth and the growth of some cities at the expense of others. The Black Death's impact on urbanization was complex. While some cities declined, others adapted to the new economic realities and became centers of trade and commerce in the post-plague period. The long-term effect of the plague was to accelerate the shift away from a predominantly agrarian economy towards one that was more diversified and urbanized. Cultural impact: shifts in religion, art, and mentalities. Crisis of faith and religious upheaval. The Black Death had a profound impact on the religious life of medieval Europe. The sheer scale of the mortality, combined with the apparent randomness of the disease, led many to question the role of God and the Church in human affairs. Some saw the plague as divine punishment for the sins of humanity, leading to a wave of religious fervor and penance. Others, however, began to question the authority of the Church, which seemed powerless to stop the spread of the disease. The failure of the Church to protect the population from the plague led to a decline in its influence. Many clergy members, including high-ranking officials, fled the cities or succumbed to the disease, leaving the Church in disarray. This loss of faith in the Church contributed to the rise of religious movements that challenged traditional doctrines, such as the Lollards in England and the Hussites in Bohemia. These movements would lay the groundwork for the later Protestant Reformation. The Black Death also led to the proliferation of apocalyptic and millenarian beliefs. The plague was often interpreted as a sign of the impending end of the world, leading to a heightened interest in eschatology and the afterlife. This period saw the rise of flagellant movements, where groups of people would publicly whip themselves as an act of penance, believing that this would appease God's wrath and bring an end to the plague. Influence on art and literature. The Black Death had a lasting impact on European art and literature. The theme of death and the macabre became prominent in artistic expressions, reflecting the pervasive sense of mortality that gripped Europe during and after the plague. The danse macabre, or dance of death motif, which depicts skeletal figures leading the living to their graves, became a common theme in visual art and literature. This imagery served as a reminder of the inevitability of death and the futility of earthly pleasures. Literature from this period also reflects the psychological impact of the plague. Works such as Giovanni Boccaccio's Decameron, which recounts the tales of a group of people who flee the plague-ridden city of Florence, provide insight into the ways in which people coped with the horrors of the Black Death. The Decameron explores themes of mortality, love, and human folly, capturing the complex emotions and responses elicited by the pandemic. The Black Death also influenced the development of religious art. As the Church sought to reinforce its authority in the wake of the plague, religious iconography became more focused on themes of suffering, redemption, and the afterlife. Images of Christ as the Man of Sorrows, the Virgin Mary as Mater Dolorosa, and the Last Judgment became more prevalent, reflecting the pervasive sense of grief and the search for spiritual consolation. Changes in mentalities and social attitudes. The Black Death had a profound impact on the collective mentality of medieval Europe. The sudden and widespread loss of life led to a shift in attitudes towards death and the afterlife. The concept of memento mori, or the reminder of death, became a central theme in European culture. This was reflected in the increased popularity of the Ars Moriendi, the art of dying, literature, which provided guidelines on how to die well and prepare for the afterlife. The plague also contributed to a growing sense of individualism. As traditional social structures broke down, people began to focus more on their own lives and the pursuit of personal goals. This shift towards individualism was reflected in the rise of autobiographical literature and the increased emphasis on personal piety in religious practice. The Black Death also led to changes in social attitudes towards authority and the established order. The failure of the church and the nobility to protect the population from the plague led to a decline in their authority and a questioning of traditional hierarchies. This contributed to the rise of popular movements that challenged the established order, such as the Peasants' Revolt in England in 1381. Although these movements were often brutally suppressed, they reflected a growing sense of discontent and a desire for greater social and economic justice. Long-term consequences. The foundations for modern Europe. The decline of feudalism and the rise of capitalism. One of the most significant long-term consequences of the Black Death was the decline of feudalism and the rise of capitalism. The collapse of the feudal system, which had been based on the labor of serfs tied to the land, created the conditions for the emergence of a more market-oriented economy. As peasants gained more freedom and mobility, they began to engage in wage labor, leading to the growth of a money-based economy. The rise of capitalism was also facilitated by the increased accumulation of wealth in the hands of the emerging middle class. Merchants, artisans, and other skilled workers were able to capitalize on the new economic opportunities created by the post-plague labor market. This shift towards a more capitalist economy would lay the foundations for the economic developments of the Renaissance and the subsequent rise of European global dominance. The Renaissance, a rebirth of culture and learning. The Black Death played a crucial role in paving the way for the Renaissance, a period of renewed interest in classical learning, art, and culture. The breakdown of traditional social structures and the questioning of established authority created an environment in which new ideas could flourish. The rise of the middle class and the accumulation of wealth also provided the financial resources needed to support artistic and intellectual endeavors. The Renaissance was characterized by a renewed interest in the classical texts of ancient Greece and Rome, which had been preserved and transmitted through the efforts of scholars in the Byzantine and Islamic worlds. This revival of classical learning was accompanied by a flourishing of art, architecture, and literature, as well as significant advances in science and technology. The Renaissance also saw the emergence of humanism, a cultural and intellectual movement that emphasized the value of human experience and the potential for individual achievement. Humanism was deeply influenced by the experiences of the Black Death, which had exposed the fragility of human life and the limitations of traditional authority. The humanist emphasis on critical thinking, individualism, and the pursuit of knowledge would have a profound impact on the development of modern European thought. The Protestant Reformation, a religious revolution. The religious upheaval caused by the Black Death laid the groundwork for the Protestant Reformation, a movement that would transform the religious landscape of Europe. The decline in the authority of the Church, combined with the rise of religious dissent, created the conditions for the emergence of new religious ideas and practices. The Reformation was initiated by figures such as Martin Luther, who challenged the authority of the Pope and called for a return to the teachings of the Bible. The movement quickly spread across Europe, leading to the establishment of Protestant churches and the fragmentation of Christendom. The Reformation had far-reaching consequences for European society. It led to the rise of religious pluralism, as different regions adopted different forms of Christianity. It also contributed to the development of modern concepts of religious freedom and individual conscience. The Reformation was deeply influenced by the experiences of the Black Death, which had exposed the limitations of traditional religious authority and created a demand for new forms of spiritual expression. The rise of the nation-state and the modern world. The Black Death also played a role in the development of the modern nation-state. The decline of feudalism and the rise of centralized monarchies created the conditions for the emergence of strong, unified states. The weakening of the church and the nobility allowed monarchs to consolidate power and establish more effective systems of governance. The rise of the nation-state was accompanied by the development of new political and legal institutions, such as parliaments and bureaucracies, which were designed to manage the complexities of governing large and diverse populations. The modern state also relied on the use of military force to maintain order and protect its interests, leading to the development of standing armies and professionalized military institutions. The Black Death contributed to the rise of the nation-state by weakening the traditional sources of authority and creating the conditions for the emergence of new forms of political power. The modern state would play a central role in the development of the modern world, shaping the course of European history and laying the foundations for the global order that exists today. Conclusion. The Black Death was a turning point in European history, marking the end of the medieval world and the beginning of the modern era. Its impact on medieval society was profound, leading to significant social, economic, and cultural changes. The collapse of the feudal system, the rise of the middle class, and the questioning of traditional authority created the conditions for the emergence of new economic, political, and cultural institutions. The Black Death also had a lasting impact on European thought and culture, influencing the development of the Renaissance, the Reformation, and the modern nation-state. The pandemic exposed the fragility of human life and the limitations of traditional authority, leading to a shift towards individualism, critical thinking, and the pursuit of knowledge. The legacy of the Black Death continues to resonate in the modern world. Its lessons about the importance of resilience, adaptability, and innovation in the face of crisis are as relevant today as they were in the 14th century. The Black Death remains a powerful reminder of the ways in which human societies can be transformed by the forces of nature, and of the enduring capacity of humanity to overcome even the most devastating challenges. Thanks for listening. Like and comment. And please subscribe, as that will help us get more videos out to those interested in the Middle Ages. See you next time on Medieval Chronicles 1066. Stay curious.